in this course. Every time I've read this law, there is some new dimension that I've learned, which hopefully I'm able to share with all of you. I can see a lot of familiar faces who have actually implemented this law. Vijay Saib from Pune, my good friend. So look forward to your inputs also, sir, on domestic transfer pricing, and I'm sure all of you also would have had some interesting experiences in the first round of domestic transfer pricing last year. Very interesting. Couple of experiences to share. On the ground, when you ask transfer pricing officers across the country and even people who are looking at this law, so what now on domestic transfer pricing? When are you going to start assessing it? When are you going to start looking at it? And they say that there is still good 2 years time left, so why worry, why bother about it now? Number one. Number two, and this was actually interesting, this week I was trying to get the data of how many domestic TP certificates were filed in the first round that happened last year, and surprisingly I got to know that there is no such data that exists. Though it's hard to believe. I mean, the fact that they increased the number from 5 to 20 crores, they must have had some figures in front of them. Unfortunately, I couldn't present it. I've requested Hiren also to help me with this. The moment I have this number, I'll share it with the group. So over the next 90 minutes, we are going to look at this law, which is barely 2.5 years old in its new form, so to speak. There is no judgment, there is no clarification or a point of view from CBDT except one recent safe harbor that government has released in respect of electricity companies, and we'll deal with that later. So it's a good news and a bad news. Good news because the law is virgin and everybody has a scope to interpret it till the law gets settled. Everyone has a scope to challenge the limits of this law and explore what it is. Bad news is because there is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of grey areas, a lot of open points. We've seen with the transfer pricing law, which was introduced in 2001, 14 years, and we still are rediscovering whether transfer pricing is a charging provision, and finally Bombay High Court in Vodafone had to come and clarify that it is actually a computation mechanism and not a charging provision. Another interesting point, this week Delhi High Court delivered a judgment in case of marketing intangibles. I'm not going to go into the issue of marketing intangibles, but there is an obiter of the High Court, again on the transfer pricing principles, which says that the transfer pricing law is actually an anti-avoidance provision. It is not a charging section, and therefore that is how the transfer pricing officer should look at the law. It is an anti-avoidance law, not a charging law, number one. And number two, and this is again an interesting observation which I think will apply to most of the transfer pricing provisions, is that the High Court has said that the real income theory also is relevant in case of transfer pricing. So you cannot artificially tax something, bring to tax something. This is something what Bombay High Court also said in Vodafone, but more so there is a reaffirmation from another High Court in a very erudite judgment of this on marketing intangible, and court said that the real income principle should continue to be relevant even for transfer pricing. So I think that is the basis or the fundamental structure which also should apply even for domestic transfer pricing. I thought I should just share these points with you. Why domestic transfer pricing? Before I begin into the specifics, let me just take a quick poll. How many of you over here have done at least one domestic transfer pricing study or a certification or a compliance? Just raise hands. At least one? Okay. Sorry, anybody had? Alright. So need for coverage, and we all know that taxpayers look at tax arbitrage that exists between between different taxable units, and the simple example being a company and a spouse of a director or children of director. You know, if the income is if a salary is paid from a company to a spouse of a director, then company gets a deduction of 30%, and in the hands of the individual, you get basic exemption limits, ATC, etc., and your effective tax rate gets reduced. This is a very basic level tax arbitrage that comes in. That also even applies in the domestic transactions and in a cross-border situations. In a domestic situations, a tax holiday unit, let's say you have two undertakings. One is a undertaking eligible for a deduction or a tax holiday, as we call it, and another undertaking is a fully tax-paying unit. So profits of the tax holiday unit are completely tax-free. Then the natural tendency would be to try and see, can I have more profits go in a tax holiday unit and more expenses to go in a unit which is tax-paying unit, and therefore reduce my effective tax rate. And which is why which is why you have a domestic transfer pricing issue which comes into picture. That results in an erosion of tax base, which is why we had certain provisions like ATI 8 and ATI 10 in the domestic law as well. So this is a numerical example. I mean, I'll not go into the specific numbers, but as I said, by reallocating expenses between tax holiday unit and a non-tax holiday unit, one is able to reduce the overall tax payable. And please note, these are the domestic transactions, so transactions between two residents. So there is a erosion of tax base that is happening even within the country. And then the other issue is transfer pricing, cross-border transfer pricing, wherein you allocate more expenses to the Indian unit or allocate less income to the Indian unit and keep more income outside India. That again results in an erosion of Indian tax base, for which you have international transfer pricing provisions. In the context of domestic TP, the other example where the erosion of tax base happens is the use of carry forward losses. Tax holiday is one example, use of carry forward losses. So an entity which has been making losses and has a huge accumulated losses with it, what does it do with these losses? You know, there is for loss there is a limit of 8 financial years. After 8 years, the loss carry forward is not available. So there have been situations where companies have tried to make use of these losses by say having more income in that unit, which correspondingly generates an expense in another unit or another company, thereby again resulting in transfer of income and therefore overall erosion of the tax base. So these are different situations in which within Indian transactions between Indian entities, tax gets eroded. Is domestic transfer pricing new? Yes, the law was introduced in 2012. But if you look at the Income Tax Act, since its beginning, there have been several provisions in which the principles of fair value have been considered. So one may think that the transfer pricing is new, but the fair value, which is equivalent to transfer price or an arm's length price in general sense, has been there in the statute book. 48(2)(b, the traditional section which is there. What does it say? That if the assessing officer believes that the expenditure is excessive or unreasonable, having regard to the fair value, legitimate needs of the business, and the benefits accruing to the taxpayer, then assessing officer has a right to disallow the expenses. So this, in our tax audit reports, we as chartered accountants certify that everything is okay. Assessing officers try and question these expenses. We've been dealing with it for over so many years. ATI 8 and 10, these are again safeguards in tax holiday sections. We are going to look at these sections in detail. So those who have not read these provisions will again together read these sections and try and see what do they provide for. Again, these sections have been there right from the beginning when tax holiday or deductions under these two sections were introduced. The famous and most debated amendment leading to immovable property transfer, section 50C and now 43CA. Again, in my view, they are transfer pricing provisions in some sense. Here the arm's length price is equivalent to stamp duty value. So that is a benchmark that government introduced. Another example is acquisition of immovable property, where assessing officer believes that the value of the asset is inflated, then he has a right to recompute the value of assets. Again, if you look at the objective of this provision, it is to ensure that there is no overpricing and therefore consequential excess depreciation claim being made. In other words, even the asset purchase should be recorded at a fair value, at a right price. So all these examples have been present in the statute book for years. These are, as I call, examples of transfer pricing wherein the fair value principles were given. What is therefore the trigger to have a new law called domestic transfer pricing, and what is different in it is what we will see. And the trigger to this is a Supreme Court judgment in case of Glaxo. This was a judgment pronounced in 2010. I think there were multiple Glaxo Group entities, and the issue was on the section 48(2)(b) disallowance in respect of expenditure being paid between Glaxo entities. And assessing officer had invoked 48(2)(b) disallowance, and the matter was before the Supreme Court. Here actually Supreme Court, while looking at whether the payments made by Glaxo were did they satisfy section 48(2)(b) tests, looked at various situations, and we have seen in the past that courts have gone into the tax neutrality. In other words, if there is an excessive payment being made by one entity, that is a receipt in the hands of the another entity, and if that other entity has paid full tax on it, where is the tax base erosion? That is what court has looked at and has applied in the context of 48(2)(b). Similar observations were made by Supreme Court even in Glaxo. But Supreme Court, and this is judgment by Justice Kapadia, who then became the Chief Justice of Supreme Court and who also delivered Vodafone judgment. So Justice Kapadia did observe the need for domestic transfer pricing, so to speak. I think he personally also, transfer pricing is one of the subjects which is close to his heart also, and perhaps that led to this these observations in Glaxo judgment. So he did talk about the tax arbitrage which exists in a tax holiday, non-tax holiday situations, loss entities and so on. And Supreme Court actually recommended CBDT that for 48(2)(b) or ATI 8 and 10 related transactions, where the assessing officer has a power to make the adjustment or redetermine the profits or expenses, it should be determined based on the fair value, and there should be a method to that madness. What Supreme Court also said is there on your slide, that AO should apply any of the generally accepted methods of determining arm's length price, including methods provided under the transfer pricing legislation, the international transfer pricing as we understand. So this is an observation given by the Supreme Court in Glaxo. And Supreme Court did not stop at that. They also said that there needs to be a filing and reporting and maintenance of the documentation similar to again the transfer pricing provision, which also helps in respect of these domestic transactions for which otherwise there are no rules today. It's just a simple law under 48(2)(b) or ATI 8 or 10, including filing of the audit reports and so on. CBDT, unlike, Supreme Court keeps giving suggestions on several issues. Not just Supreme Court, many high courts. Most of the times they ignore or it takes a lot of time to implement those observations, but here CBDT was very quick to listen to Supreme Court and in a matter of just about 1.5 years, they brought in domestic transfer pricing provisions. So as the Income Tax Act refers them as specified domestic transactions in 2012. Incidentally, this is a budget presented by Pranab Mukherjee, which overruled Vodafone Amendment, which brought in, I think, over 24 retrospective amendments and so on. So domestic transfer pricing also formed one of the amendments in this same budget as well of 2012. And the memorandum says that the amendments are in line with the Supreme Court observations in Glaxo. And actually two reasons, bring in the objectivity in determining income or reasonableness of the expenditure. So that is what the intention of introducing domestic transfer pricing law is, that it is to bring the objectivity and create a legally enforceable obligation on assessee to maintain the documentation. So this is the objective with which these provisions have been introduced. So again, a takeaway for me at least is that they do not envisage these to be a charging provisions. Reason I'm again repeatedly coming to this point, and I have a case study towards the end, that once the domestic transfer pricing assessment begins, the creative minds from the officers, from the revenue, will try and, wherein Vodafone or Shell type of situations will even emerge in the domestic TP situations, wherein some of these principles will become relevant in my view, and therefore it is relevant to understand the objective first. Then we'll of course look at the specific language of the law, but objective is to bring the objectivity in determining income, and government at that time introduced a monetary threshold of 5 crores. So if the value of domestic transactions which are liable for domestic transfer pricing, if it is below 5 crores, then there should not be an applicability. This threshold is much higher compared to the international transfer pricing, where the threshold is 1 crore for maintenance of documentation. The Rule 10D documentation for international transfer pricing, the threshold is 1 crore. Below 1 crore, officer can still determine arm's length price, but you don't have to maintain all the requirements of Rule 10D. Here, the limit was 5 crores, and now it has been raised to 20 crores. So, any questions on Glaxo, the impact of Glaxo and this memorandum? Any observations anybody has about the evolution of domestic TP law, so to speak? Alright, so just one more perspective. India is not the only country which has domestic TP. We always have a tendency to look at West, and West has been following domestic transfer pricing. In fact, if you see the Indian domestic TP provisions, largely they cover expenditure side, not the revenue side, except in case of tax holiday units. And I see the way the laws are emerging in a country, very soon we'll have a domestic TP even on the income side. Though the neutrality and all of those principles are there, I think one day even this will happen. So India is not the only country to have such a legislation. Other countries too have introduced domestic transfer pricing in their domestic law. In fact, if you look at domestic transfer pricing, and I'm sure all of you have read about General Anti-Avoidance Rules, GAR, which of course are now deferred by 2 years. In my view, domestic transfer pricing is an example of a specific anti-avoidance rule, or a SAR, which is there, which is to basically avoid the illusion of tax base. So this slide summarizes the applicability and what are the implications. We'll first cover the basics and then look at the specific provisions. So on the left hand side, on the applicability, right now broadly two set of transactions that are covered. The first box on the left side covers the undertakings which are claiming tax holiday or the deductions, and deductions primarily under section 80IA, 80IB and Section 10AA. So undertakings to which these incentive deductions are available, and in these undertakings there are two kinds of transactions between two units of the same assessee and transactions between closely linked entities. And if the tax holder unit is doing these transactions, then these transactions will be subject to the domestic transfer pricing. This is one set of transactions. As you will see, this covers both income side as well as the expenditure side, because you will decide the profits eligible for tax holiday or deduction by considering income as well as expenditure of that unit or that undertaking. The second box on the left hand side, the specified domestic transaction definition, is the expenditure for which payments to the related parties under 48(2)(b) are made. And this again, all of us are very well aware of which are these parties. So salary to the directors, commission to the subsidiary, purchase of goods from parent company, etc. All of these transactions will be subject to 48(2)(b), and if such payments are there, then they will be treated as a specified domestic transaction. So, and any other transaction that may be specified. So here CBDT has been given wide powers to notify any other transactions as well without going through the route of the Parliament budget amendment. So this is to be watched out for. So you aggregate all these transactions. If the value of those transactions exceeds the value threshold, either 5 crore or 20 crore, then the transfer pricing compliance is applicable, which means that you have to determine the value of these transactions based on arm's length principle. And you studied, I think in the initial lectures, what arm's length principle means. Second, you have to maintain contemporaneous documentation which supports the computation of arm's length price. So the industry overview, the business overview, the functional analysis, FAR, the economic analysis, all of that needs to be maintained even in respect of domestic transactions. Even a salary to director needs to be benchmarked that way. The third thing is, in your annual filings before the assessing officer, you have to file a certificate reporting these specified domestic transactions in Form 3CB. So now the amended online form also has additional fields wherein the details relating to the domestic transfer pricing, these specified domestic transactions need to be reported, and a failure to maintain this documentation or produce this documentation also attracts penalty at par with transfer pricing provisions. So 2% value of the transaction and a 1 lakh rupee penalty for non-filing of the CA certificate or accountant certificate. So the penalty is the scariest part, which is why we all need to worry about the domestic transfer pricing situations. I mean, let's take a situation of a road construction project which is eligible for Section 80IA deduction, maybe a 500 crore project with a long gestation period, 80IA. Your project IRR would consider tax deduction given under 80IA IB. If the assessing officer, so let's take for value sake 500 crores. If you fail to maintain the domestic transfer pricing documentation, 2% of that is a penalty risk that you run, and therefore the need to give attention to the domestic DPA. I think that may be a good starting point to at least look at this law, because and frankly, whatever interaction I've had, most of the people have not looked at this provision with a careful detail, especially at the beginning of the year. I mean, one is to do the compliance at the end of the year, but this actually means engaging with the people who run the business and to tell them that the profits of these undertakings, which are eligible for tax holiday, need to be done in a particular manner. I mean, I'm sure you those who are in practice here would have clients which are into infrastructure projects or real estate builders, for example, who are claiming 80IP deductions. A particular scheme has is eligible for section 80IP deduction, and other scheme, is subject to tax. How the expense allocation happens between these two schemes, the builder needs to be sensitized. For many years, nobody had questioned him on this, and even in our due course, normal course, we have not specifically applied our mind on the expense allocation, keeping this in mind. That is set to change with the domestic TP, because then you have to look at this as a separate unit and independently assess the profitability of this undertaking or unit by doing the benchmarking. So if it is a real estate developer and let us say that project is earning say 20% profitability, you need to ensure and find out that what are the other developers in the same, let's say if it's in a retail housing, then retail housing developers, what is the profitability that they are earning? And if that profitability is in the range of 3%, if you apply TNMM method, then maybe your 80IP deduction is protected. Otherwise, officer has a right to question that. In other words, if the other developers are earning, let us say 10% on the retail housing, and your project is earning 20%, then this is a case, and you have of course domestic transfer pricing transactions, then you are exposed to ATIA 10 by saying that you are earning more than ordinary profits, right? Here, in fact, it's the other way. Because I am claiming a deduction, officer believes that I am claiming an excess deduction, then he has a right to deny my tax holiday. Are you with me on this example? Yes. Alright, perfect. So these are the implications. So applicability, the monetary threshold, and the documentation to be made. So everything that we read, studied about international transfer pricing also therefore applies for the domestic transfer pricing as far as the compliance part is concerned. Any questions here? So 20 crores value threshold, they have increased in the memorandum, in the finance bill 2015. So once it is applied, effective financial year 1st April 2015 onwards, the value threshold will be 20 crores. And the reason they have given in line with the Make in India concept is that in order to address the issue of compliance cost in case of small businesses on account of low threshold of 5 crores. So CBDT accepted that the 5 crore threshold was on the lower side, and they increased it to 20 crores. Now I need active involvement from all of you. We will together look at the law. Section 92, actually, alright, so this is 92(2)(a). This is slide number 33 at the end. Just relevant sections I have put down for ease of reference. Any allowance for an expenditure or interest or allocation of any cost or expense or any income in relation to a specified domestic transaction shall be computed having regard to the arm's length price. So this is the, I shouldn't use the word charging section, but the section which enables domestic transfer pricing into the Indian Income Tax Act, section 92(2)(a). So any allowance for an expenditure, interest, allocation of any cost or expense or any income. This is more or less similar to even the international transfer pricing definition. It shall be determined having regard to the arm's length price. Section 92(3) also therefore continues to apply to domestic TP, which means that if after applying domestic TP, if there is a reduction in the taxable income or increase in the loss, then the domestic TP will not be applicable. So head I win, tail you lose, which continues even in the case of domestic TP which is applicable. Put on 92BA on the screen. For the purposes of this section and section 92, 92C, 92D, 92E, specify domestic transaction. In case of an assessee, it means it is applicable to all the assessees. It is applicable to even a foreign company if it is an assessee, and if it meets if it falls in these 6 clauses which are mentioned. Please note this, and I have an example as to how it applies even to a foreign company. Means any of the following transactions not being an international transaction. So for the purpose of this section, specified domestic transaction means any of the following transactions not being an international transaction. So the first step is that whether it is an international transaction, whether transaction which you are examining is an international transaction or not. If it is yes, then it is not subject to the domestic transfer pricing. And I will give one simple example. Let us say I have a foreign parent company. Let's say company in USA, 100%. It has a 100% subsidiary in India. This subsidiary is importing goods from the parent company. Now, this is a transaction wherein both the entities are regarded as associated enterprises. One of the entities is a non-resident, the foreign company. So it is a transaction between two associated enterprises, one of which it is a non-resident, and therefore it qualifies as an international transaction as per the definition of international transfer pricing that we examined. So if it is an international transaction, then it is out of domestic TP. Right? So the first test is this, that it should not be an international transaction. Then, which are the transactions which are covered? The first is any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to a person referred to in clause B of 248(2)B basically. Second, any transaction referred to in section 80A. Third, any transfer of goods or services referred to in subsection 8 of 80IA. Please notice the way the wordings in each of these sub-clauses is different. The first clause says expenditure in respect of which payment has been made. Second is any transaction. Third does not use the word any transaction. It says any transfer of goods or services. The fourth says any business transacted between the assessee and the other person as referred in 80IA 10. Similar provision for 10AA, which is applicable to special economic zone units, SEZ units. Any other transaction as may be prescribed. And it says that, and where aggregate of such transactions entered into by the assessee in the previous year exceeds the sum of 5 crores, this will change to 20 crores once this Finance Act of 2015 is passed. So this is again, as I said, the enabling provision for domestic transfer pricing. And as I said, the choice of the way the wordings is there is very interesting. It is different in each of the sub clauses, and there is a purpose to it as well, which we will see. One question here, and I seek your comments. This was one of the hyper-technical views which was being debated, is that the 5 crore transaction limit, should it apply qua each clause, Roman clause 1, Roman clause 2, Roman clause 3 separately? So if I have 48(2)B transaction worth 4 crores, if I have a 80IA 8 transaction worth 4 crores and 80IA 10 transaction worth 4 crores, and let's consider a 5 crore as the overall limit, then is domestic TP applicable to me? So looking at the wording, one view was that where aggregate of such transactions. So such transaction, should you look at it qua each clause or on an overall basis? Should it be 5 crores or less? Overall. Yeah. So is there anybody over here believes that qua each subclause the limit should be applied from the language?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Besides this.
Sure.
Now the limit is 5 crores. the limit is going to increase from assessment to 16, 17.
Sure.
Now for 3 years I'll be filing my SDT report because my turnover is above my specified turnover more than 5 crores.
Yeah.
Let us assume it is 15 crores today. So I have been filing my SDT report. Now during the assessment stage, there is an adjustment done by the transfer pricing officer. Okay, 15 is no, it has to be 6. I mean, the expenditure, right? Assuming it's expenditure, it has to be less. Okay, it has to be about 12 crores. So he makes an adjustment of 3 crores. Now from 16, 17, SDT doesn't apply.
Sure.
I file the return without making any adjustments. Would the officer take a stand? Look, in the last 3 years you had an adjustment. Okay, now no doubt SDT doesn't apply, but still the provisions of the law, SDT is only to bring in the arm's length calculation.
Sure.
So then what would be the stand we could take in this case?
Very good question. And on 48-2B, when we look at the analysis of 48-2B, I will deal with this particular issue. That's a very interesting proposition as to the interplay between 48-2B and domestic TP. Are they independent or are they now married to each other? And we'll see that. Let me just complete this point on why this interpretation of 5 crores should it apply to each clause is because the use of the word such present over here, and therefore one view was that you should look at it each subclause. But if you look at the memorandum of this year's budget, they are very clearly over there mentioned. So intention is to look at it on an aggregate basis. So no issue at all with it. We go back to the okay. Let's come to now 48.2. 92BA says that specified domestic transaction means any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to persons referred to in 48.2B. Right. So I'm on slide 32, which is again at the end the section is mentioned. Now there are two parts to this. One is that 48.2B application, and second is persons referred to in 48.2B. The domestic transfer pricing provision refers to persons referred in 48.2B, which will come a little later. First, let us look at 48.2B per se. What does 48.2 tells us? And I'll read this section again. I'm sure we've read this many times, but let's go through it all over again once, including the proviso which was inserted by Finance Act 2012, where the assessee incurs any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to any person referred to in clause B of this subsection, and the assessing officer is of the opinion that such expenditure is excessive or unreasonable, having regard to the fair value of the goods, services or facilities for which the payment is made, or the legitimate needs of the business or profession of the assessee, or the benefits derived by or accruing to him therefrom. So there are three different categories and I would say options available to the taxpayer to justify the expenditure. One is legitimate needs, the benefits derived, and so the fair value, legitimate needs and the benefits derived. There's so much of the expenditure as is considered by the assessing officer to be excessive or unreasonable shall not be allowed as a deduction. Proviso, this is very interesting, provided that no disallowance on account of any expenditure being excessive or unreasonable, having regard to the fair market value, shall be made in respect of specified domestic transaction referred to in 92BA if such transaction is at arm's length price as defined in clause 2 of 92F. So again, there are 2 or 3 legal issues that come up over here. First of all, in my view, 48(2) main section looks at various situations and it allows a taxpayer to defend his expenditure by looking at multiple situations. Legitimate needs of the business is very wide. That price may not be an arm's length price in that sense by determined by applying the cup method, because cup method requires a strict comparability, etc., etc. So my arm's length price could be X, but having regard to the legitimate needs of the business in a particular situation, I may be able to justify why I have paid an amount which is higher than the so-called cup price or an arm's length price. So in my view, the scope of 48(2)B in fact is restricted if I am subjected to the domestic transfer pricing. In other words, if I am able to show that the price is at arm's length price, then, because this is the proviso which is inserted. So if I am able to show that my price meets the arm's length price test, I am good with 48(2)B is concerned. In addition to that, in my view, I am still able to, as far as 48 disallowance is concerned, 48(2)B disallowance is concerned, I am able to justify and still get away with 48(2)B, I mean not subject to 48(2)B disallowance by demonstrating A, B, C. That is not available to me when I come to the transfer pricing situation. Now coming to your point, sir, is the transfer pricing adjustment necessary to invoke 48(2)B? Let's first answer this question. Let me just repeat, is domestic transfer pricing adjustment necessary to apply 48(2)B? In my view, there is just a proviso, and all that proviso says that if there is an arm's length price, then you don't have a disallowance. It doesn't stop application of 48(2)B. So in the example that you mentioned, and I hope everybody heard his example. Do I need to repeat it? Alright, should I repeat it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so his example was that today my value of transaction 48(2)B payments was, let's say, 8 crores. During the domestic transfer pricing assessment, assessing officer said that the value should not be 8 crores but it should have been 5 crores, and there was a 3 crore rupee of disallowance by invoking transfer pricing. Now the value threshold is increased to 20 crores. So I am out of domestic TP in that year, but can the officer still apply the same principles or logic and seek to disallow even if I am not subjected to domestic TP? As I said, in this case, maybe the arm's length principle will not be applicable. You will still go back to 48(2)B, wherein whatever payment you made, let's say even in that year the payment is 8 crores, is that payment excessive or unreasonable having regard to the fair value is what you need to still justify. In my view, if you are able to, for example, demonstrate that this payment is considering the legitimate needs, etc., then 48(2)B disallowance, in my view, cannot be invoked by the assessing officer. But for a moment, let us say that situation is not there. Even if there is no domestic TP applicability, nothing stops officer from invoking 48(2)B. That is what my view would be on this point. Any point of view, any other scenario, situation that we could think of? So I mean, just to simplify, if I'm able to satisfy arm's length, then I'm out of 48(2)B. That's what it looks like in this situation. But if I'm not subjected to the domestic TP for any reason, that still doesn't stop an assessing officer from making or from invoking a 48(2)B situation. So there is another scenario. Let us say I am able. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So say I will not have to file TP reports, I mean the audit reports and all. But does it mean that I still have to give justification, documentation to establish that my cost is 8 crores?
So in this example,
yeah.
right. So documentation, clearly you don't have to maintain as has been prescribed in Rule 10D. I am saying that, but this is a fundamental question. Even today or even before 2012, when I am incurring this 8 crore expenditure, when assessee certifies or claims that this does not fall foul of 48(2)(b, there is an inherent presumption that it is at a fair prices. If the officer would have questioned that expenditure, let's say salary paid to the spouse of the director is a common issue which gets which used to come in the assessment, which still comes in the assessment. In which case you are able, you ought to justify that by demonstrating the qualification or the active participation in the day-to-day activities. If that is not proven, then anyway you are liable to 48(2)(b disallowed. So maybe you don't have to prepare the industry overview and all of that to justify this kind of a transaction. But some documentary evidence is anyway necessary and expected. So at least on that part, there is no change post domestic TP provisions coming into picture. Yeah.
See, earlier I think my view was the burden of proof was on the officer. If SDT doesn't apply,
Sure.
burden of proof was on the officer, right? Yet, but now the initial burden is on me.
Right.
Now for 3 years he has made the adjustment. So he said, look boss, it proves that you are not at, paid him at the arms. And see, ultimately even if you look at his, that such expenses having regard to FMV of the goods, etc., we'll have to do a FAR analysis.
Sure.
Okay,
In a sense.
for SDT, yes, it's a FAR analysis.
Yes.
So based on that FAR, he has made the adjustment.
Right.
Okay, now that SDT doesn't apply, he can definitely say, look boss, okay, the burden is on me, but last 3 years you have been adjusted, it has been accepted, probably even at that level, you have lost the case. So the burden, does it again come back to the assessee himself, or does it,
okay, I would say that the legal issue of burden being on the officer still stays with him, but I think he's in a better position to discharge that burden by using the data available in the past assessments, based on which he can make further pointed inquiries and be able to easily discharge 48(2)(b burden, in my view, because of this. I think, so one is that if it causes hardship or whatever, those are points which are separate. Let's go back again what Supreme Court said and why the memorandum. It says that let us bring an objectivity in this determination. Perhaps domestic transfer pricing provisions in one sense bring that objectivity, because earlier you were not you could have used different approaches. Now you have to follow 5 methods, do a FAR analysis and systematically justify your claim. So this is an interesting part on 48(2)(b applicability vis-a-vis domestic TP.
Sir, my 48(2)(b transactions are 18 lakh in current year.
18 lakhs.
18 lakhs. But during the assessment, the AO is increasing to 22 lakhs. So do I cover in that 92?
So it should be 18 crores.
18 lakhs is my trust. So I am not covered under domestic transfer right now. I have not done anything which is required to be done under the domestic transfer.
Sure.
During the assessment, he is increasing or disallowing.
So actually, if I am incurred, let us say 18 crores expenditure which is covered under 48(2)(b, typically after the assessment, the value of transaction will not be increased. Value will remain at 18 crores. I would have claimed a deduction. I would have claimed a deduction under section 37 for these expenses. He will seek to disallow it, let us say, by invoking 48(2)(b. That doesn't mean that, I can't envisage a situation where he increases value from 18 to 22 in a 48(2)(b situation.
No sir, but the differential price, whatever he is charging, he will write in his assessment order that 48(2)(b, this is the amount he is charged. Now I am adding so much of money to my total profit.
Right, sir. So if it was a revenue side of a transaction, then this situation would have been relevant. But in the expenditure side, assessing officer will seek to reduce the amount. He will say that 18 crore was not a right price, but maybe 10 crores was the right price. And therefore he will try and apply the domestic TP. The situation, and it will be interesting to see on our ATI 8 and 10 situations how it happens. But maybe when we come to ATI 8 and 10, let's revisit this point. So the scenario that you are presenting, in my view, that looks impossible to occur in a real life situation. He may disallow entire 18 crores. Even then I will not carry a risk of domestic TP compliance. See, it could so happen that on the 48 B relation, let's say there is a particular entity and I have treated that entity as not covered under 48 B, and during the assessment officer examines the definition and takes a view, let's say interpretation of the term relative, and he covers XYZ person to be relative, and if that happens, then I could be subjected to the domestic TP compliance, and maybe then I have failed to maintain the documentation. That situation could happen in 48 B situations. Any other question on this one aspect of 48 B? Okay. So again, 92BA, stepping back, it says that any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made to a person referred to in 48B. So domestic TP says that you will apply arm's length principles and determine the price for expenditure for which payment has been made or is to be made to the person. So it doesn't refer to any of the three tests that we have seen in 48B. So the moment there is a payment or an expenditure to these parties, the domestic TP compliance gets triggered. And let's look at which are these related parties, so to speak. This is a table which I have tried to simplify. This is slide number 12, so page number 6 perhaps. I'll not go through all these relations. I think, as I said, we all have seen these relations, have studied them as well in greater detail. So if any of these parties, I mean, for a company, let us say director, his relatives, individual who has a substantial interest in assessing business. Substantial interest means 20% equity threshold or participation in profit share in case of non-corporate entities. The third point on companies is interesting, and this was another change that happened in the budget 2012. A company, a firm, AOP or HUF or their relatives who have substantial interest in assesses business profession, including a company in which such company is holding a substantial interest. So these parts highlighted in bold were not present in the Income Tax Act for years together. What this in simple terms means is that, let us say you have A Limited and you have X Limited and Y Limited as two subsidiaries. These would be called as fellow subsidiaries, so to speak. These fellow subsidiaries per se were not covered under 48B before this amendment. But after this amendment, they are covered and treated as a related party for the purpose of 48(2). So this has actually two implications. One is, of course, in the domestic TP you need to cover these transactions. The second is, independently in the tax audit reporting, since this amendment has happened, you should be disclosing these transactions between these two from a 3CD perspective. So this is a independent point I thought I should just mention. I think most of us, out of abundant caution, were probably reporting anyways these transactions, but this is one change that has happened in the budget of 2012. So if any expenditure, if any payment has been made, any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made to these entities, that will be subject to domestic transfer pricing. Right. Two interesting points again come out of this. Let me first take the last one first. Whether 20% threshold is to be examined qua each director or qua group of directors. So if, let's say, there is company X and company Y, there is no common equity holding. Let's say company X has 3 directors and each of them, let us say, holds 15% in the company, and the 2 directors are also directors in company, the other company. They also hold again 15% each in this second company. The question is, will these two companies be considered as parties covered under 48(2)(b)? The issue is that should you look at the equity holding of the director individually or collectively? And there have been two schools of thought on this. I think the better view over here is that you should look at it qua each individual, unless of course you invoke GAR and there is a motive to be shown. But let's say all three are independent directors, then you should look at the equity holding individually and not collectively. In other words, these two entities will not be related entities for the purpose of 48(2)(b), and therefore domestic TP should not apply, 48(2)(b) also should not apply. Let me take you back to the section again. It says any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made. So if there is just a payment but no expenditure incurred, then will domestic TP be applicable? And here there are there are two examples I would like to just consider for discussion. One is, let us say I have acquired a fixed asset from my parent company and I have made a payment for purchase of fixed asset. Now there are two independent transactions that happen. One is a transaction for payment for purchase of machinery, and second is I will be claiming depreciation on that machinery. Which of the transactions gets covered under domestic TP? That is a question, and I would first like your inputs on this. And here, I'm sure those of you who have studied international transfer pricing will immediately try and draw a reference to international TP, wherein we try and benchmark the depreciation on the asset purchases, etc. But please remember, the definition of international transaction is quite wide. To that extent, here the definition of specified domestic transaction is very narrow. And therefore, I'm saying expenditure in respect of which payment has been made to parties covered under 48(2)(b). So, two questions. One is, payment for acquiring fixed asset, is that a transaction to be benchmarked? And the depreciation that I am claiming, will that be subject to domestic TP?
Payment for the fixed asset.
Yes. Yeah. Let's first deal with payment for fixed asset. Is that a transaction subject to domestic TP? It should be.
It should be, because it is a payment what we are making, and depreciation is nothing but an allowance which we claim.
Right.
No,
so I am making payment. There is no debate on that. It says expenditure in respect of which payment has been made. So is there an expenditure by incurring? I am making payment for purchase of asset, but am I incurring expenditure?
It is a capital expenditure.
It's an
Yeah.
They had views that
So I'm
it should
okay.
be taken or not.
Yes.
Like loan from parent company to the subsidiary company, where subsidiary company gives interest on that.
Sure.
10%. Then the loan is not covered under section 48(2)(b), but interest is, I think, covered.
Sure, but interest is a separate transaction and interest is certainly an expenditure. So payment of interest is definitely covered, no quarrel on that. And I am with you on loan transaction. There is maybe merely a payment, and so can you apply the similar analogy to depreciation and capital asset? Is depreciation an expenditure or an allowance? So any other views?
Again, the value of depreciation will depend on the value of the
Assets. Yeah. So what if I paid more price
More price. Yeah.
for purchase of fixed asset?
So it's a payment for expenditure. I would say it's expenditure in respect of which payment.
So it's not actually non-cash item is there, but allowance is there, then it will definitely reduce your bottom line. So that's why it's the gray area, I think so.
Yeah. I think if we look back, the jurisprudence on section 48(2)(b) per se, forget domestic TP for a moment, just 48(2)(b) situations. I think this first point on whether depreciation is an expenditure or allowance, there is a technical view, given that it is an allowance and not expenditure, and therefore 48(2)(b does not apply on depreciation. Officer can still invoke section 43(1) explanation on definition of actual cost and redetermine my actual cost. So that is a possibility for sure. So that is the jurisprudence on 48(2)(b). Now if we try and apply it in the context of domestic TP, in my view, I think we should be able to apply so first of all, payment for purchase of fixed asset, there is no expenditure, I think there is no quarrel. On the depreciation point, as long as the law stands that depreciation is an allowance and not an expenditure, and that's something which I personally have not been able to reconcile, that is the hyper technical differentiation between an expenditure and an allowance should be considered. But as long as that view stands, one is able to, at least for this clause, one is able to say that fixed asset purchases should not be considered for the domestic TP. In other words, the purchase of fixed assets from my holding company, I don't have to justify, at least for the purpose of domestic TP, that they are overpriced or overpriced in that particular situation. I am saying that this is only for domestic TP. Please remember that explanation to section 43(1) still applies, which gives a power to the assessing officer to decide the actual cost of fixed asset and redetermine that. So even if I am out of domestic TP, I still have to justify my price if the officer feels that the purchase of asset is at a higher value. But the depreciation claim per se, in other clauses, ATIA 8 and 10 situations, that's something which I have to be careful about, and we'll come to that situation a bit later. So this is 40(a)(2)(b). Any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made is covered. So the typical examples would be salary, cross charge, payment of rent, purchase of goods. All of these transactions would be covered under this clause, and one has to consider applying domestic transfer pricing for these transactions. Please remember, this section applies irrespective whether you are a tax holiday entity or not. A company which is a full tax paying company, not claiming any tax holiday, but is making a payment to these specified entities, that company has to comply with the domestic transfer pricing situations. And there have been very interesting situations which are coming up, especially on the cross charges and so on, or brand royalties. Let's say Tata Group, Tata Sons owns the brand Tata, and then all the subsidiaries in India make a payment for use of the brand. There are cost allocations done from head office, from group company to another company. There is a sharing of the common facilities between the group companies, and costs get allocated to different companies. All of these transactions were anyway subject to 48(2)(b), but now they will be, you will need a domestic TP compliance in respect of these transactions. So again, this clause is very interesting. It has nothing to do with the tax holiday status or whether you are claiming any deduction. The moment these payments are there, the provisions will become applicable.
So does it mean that depreciation will not have domestic transfer pricing issues?
If it is purely 48(2)(b) type of a situation, depreciation should not apply.
We just go to that definition.
Definition
40.
40(a).
That too, you have given that definition.
Okay.
Any expenditure. See, any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made. So does it mean that there has to be a cash outflow in the relevant year?
No, it says payment has been made or is to be made. So in the relevant year is not a condition.
Right. So the thing is, I have purchased the asset 4 years back. So payment has been made.
Right.
Right? Okay, now the depreciation. I mean, it is something which is difficult to, because the payment of that, suppose 100 rupees asset, I paid 500 rupees. Actually, I'm going to claim a higher depreciation.
Sure.
Okay, and if you say, and depreciation, you may call it allowance, anything, but it is something which is a charge to the profit and loss account,
Sure.
like an expenditure.
Sure.
So, could there be a stand that, look, you have paid excess money, and the expenditure, it doesn't talk of capital or revenue, that's a big issue,
Yeah.
right? And it says has been made, it may not have been made in the current year, it could have been made 4 years back.
Right.
Or to be made, which may be made after 4 years also. So, in that case, could it be said that even depreciation will have to be benchmarked with the cost? I mean, it's a...
Sure. No, so your point is valid, and which is why I said that I personally am not able to reconcile the difference between expenditure and allowance claim. For whatever reason, the special bench ruled in favor of the taxpayer by agreeing that proposition. Whether that proposition holds good or not is a point. As long as that proposition is holding good, I am able to make use of it to my advantage to say that domestic TP should not apply. If you ask me personally, I personally do not agree with that view, and I am saying that for a moment leave aside domestic TP, if 100 rupee worth of asset I have purchased for 500 rupees, assessing officer can determine the actual cost in any case, even without domestic TP being invoked into. At best, it will save me from penalties. My depreciation disallowance could still be there if the assessing officer discovers the situation. That is the point.
Only challenge could be if there is no adjustment in the 43(1).
Right.
Then what is the scenario?
Right. Yeah. Then the issue of allowance expenditure becomes relevant, and then at least as the law stands today, one can say that domestic TP should not apply. But if it is a ATI 8 or 10 situation, then this depreciation claim becomes relevant because there you decide the profits based on commercial principles and so on. We'll come to that point. So coming to this 20% threshold, there is one interesting situation that comes up. Is there are two diagrams. One is on the left side A, X, Y. After the amended definition, X and Y are related parties. Now let us look at a situation on the right hand side. A holds X and X holds 100% in Y. And let us say there is Y has made a payment for certain services to A. The question is A and Y are related parties under 48(2)(b)? That is a question. And if you look at the language of 48(2)(b) relation, it covers the direct relation. It doesn't cover the indirect relation. So A and Y are not direct subsidiary parent relationship. It is an indirect relationship. And A and Y therefore are not considered to be related parties for the purpose of 48(2)(b). And I must give credit where it is due. Institute, after a long time I have seen in their guidance note take a direct view on this point. In the guidance note at para 4A.16, they have given an explanation on this, and I just read it out. Explanation to section 48(2) deems a person to have substantial interest if such person is a beneficial owner of shares carrying not less than 20% of the voting power. The expression beneficial owner needs to be construed in contrast to legal owner and not in the context of determining indirect ownership of shares. Hence the emphasis on covering the real owner of the shares and not the nominal owner. This proposition is also supported by legal jurisprudence, which states that in a multi-tier structure, a parent cannot be regarded as a beneficial owner of shares in the downstream subsidiary merely because it owns the shares of the intermediate subsidiary companies. It is important to respect the fact that entities are separate legal entities, and there are a few more lines, and the para concludes that, in other words, for the purposes of 48(2)(b), it may be appropriate to consider only direct shareholding and not the derivative or indirect shareholding. This point of view, of course, in section 79, loss carry forward situations sometimes may go against you, but nevertheless, at least for the purpose of domestic TP certification, I think taxpayers, if there are situations, should quote this paragraph from ICI guidance note. The accountants who are certifying should also or can rely on this to justify if there are such transactions which are not being considered for the purpose of domestic TP. Right. So we looked at 42B. We look at ADI 8 and 10 later, but there are some key differentiators between international transfer pricing and domestic TP. Let's quickly look at those. As we know, international TP covers both income side as well as the expenditure side, whereas on the domestic TP it covers largely expenditure side, and in case of tax holiday units, both income and expenditure. The second bullet is interesting. For the international transfer pricing purpose, the equity threshold for two entities to be regarded as associate enterprises is 26%. In case of domestic TP 48B, the limit is 20%. So there is a difference between these two limits. Then of course APA and safe harbor is not or is available for international transaction. For domestic SDT or domestic TP, APA rules are not yet been extended to. There are no safe harbor rules except that the electricity companies, and this point I forgot to add in my slides, but I should just mention, about a month back, CBDT has issued a clarification saying that the state electricity companies or the electricity companies where the power tariff, not necessarily state, electricity companies which are regulated under the Electricity Act and where the power tariff is decided by the Electricity Commission. I mean, power companies do not have the a free hand, so to speak. It is decided based on the cost structure. After looking at cost structure, Electricity Commission agrees for a tariff rate. If that rate has been agreed and if you computed your profitability in accordance with that rate, then you don't have to, then the domestic TP is not, I mean the compliance of maintaining documentation etc. Has been exempted for such companies. This is particularly relevant because most of these electricity companies are claiming ATIA deduction, setting up of power transmission network, distribution network, etc. For international transaction, deemed transaction concept is available. So far, we don't have a deemed deemed transaction concept in case of SDT. I think SDT, by nature and by nomenclature, we always feel that it only covers transactions between two resident companies. It does not stop actually at only transactions between two resident companies. It can cover even transactions between a resident and a non-resident, and even a non-resident and non-resident. And the next two slides actually deal with these two case studies or scenarios. Entity A is a subsidiary of Entity B. Entity B is a parent company, USA, a non-resident. Let's say there is a joint venture of 75-25. Here I have put in a number of 23, but a 75-25 joint venture. And B is one of the joint venture partners which holds 25% or 23% in company A. Company A is importing the goods from company B. Now the question is SDT domestic TP applicable or not? That is a question. So any views on this? What is applicable? SDT is applicable. So domestic transfer pricing is applicable, not international. Can you elaborate why?
Because entity B is not holding more than 25%. Therefore, entity A, that is the Indian company, therefore A and B are not associated enterprise. Hence, it is not an international transaction. Therefore, it falls, and it is holding more than 20%.
Right.
Therefore, it has substantial interest in entity A.
Right.
Therefore, it falls under 40, and hence it qualifies to be a specified loss.
Right. So even though it is a cross-border purchase transaction, it is not liable to the international TP, but it is subjected to the domestic TP. So that is one point to be noted. Anybody has any views on this? Any questions? Let's look at another situation. This is, I don't know in how many situations this will occur, but I just for the clarification of law, I've put down this example. Let's say there is a foreign company called Company A. This Company A has set up a branch in India or PE in India, permanent establishment. while deciding the profits of the permanent establishment, profits attributable to the Indian business need to be computed. And while doing the PE profitability computation, you consider all the expenses under section 32, 37, all the disallowances under 48(2), etc. are also applicable even while determining the profitability of the permanent establishment. Let's say there is a director of entity A who is working for the business of PE in India. This director is also a non-resident person, and entity A makes a salary payment to this director, and because he is carrying out work for the Indian PE, his salary is attributable to the Indian permanent establishment, and PE has claimed it as a reduction. So what is the transaction as per at the India level? There is a PE which is making a salary payment to a non-resident director, okay, and now we are testing domestic TP applicability. In international transfer pricing, if you look at, there are 13 different relationships specified for qualifying as an associated enterprise, right? Just the director company relation transaction is not subject to the international TP. Only if the director is exercising the control and so on, only then the two entities qualify as associated enterprises. So this director of entity A, legal director, he is not an associated enterprise of entity A or its P, and therefore this transaction is not an international transaction. But when it comes to the domestic TP under 48(2)(b, salary payment to any director, even a non-executive director, is covered, and therefore domestic TP is applicable. As you know, the status of PE is that of a non-resident. Here the director is also non-resident, so it is a transaction between two non-residents, but still subject to the domestic TP. I just thought there will be only few situations wherein this may occur, but there is a misconception that domestic TP does not apply to cross-border situations. This is another example where it could apply. On this slide, there are several examples. Capital expenditure depreciation we have already covered. The depreciation versus allowance I was referring to Vishnu Anand Mahajan case. I think Mr. Mahajan, he expired a few years back, but he himself was a chartered accountant, and he actually had claimed this that depreciation should not be subject to 48(2), and special bench of tribunal actually ruled in favor of the taxpayer. Anyway, the last point is interesting over here. Again, this is maybe a slightly an academic discussion, but let us explore whether SDT is applicable on remuneration to partners. Partnership firm can pay interest and salary to the partners. Salary to the partners is up to the limits which have been specified under 40B. Now the question is that I am making a payment within the limits as per 40B. A partner of a partnership firm is a person covered under 48(2)(b, right?
Yes.
Any expenditure in respect of which payment is made to a partner is also therefore a transaction subject to the domestic TP. The question then comes is, if I have paid within the 40B limits, can officers still question that remuneration by invoking domestic TP provisions? That is the point. Forget for a moment domestic TP is there. Let's go back to pre-2012 situation, and I want experiences here. Whether partners' remuneration, was it ever disclosed in 3CD under 48(2)(b? and whether partner's remuneration, which is within 40B limits, was it ever questioned under 42B by assessing officer? Any experiences on this? Vidya sir, any experience? So, if the partner's remuneration is within 40B limits, it is accepted, irrespective of whether person has necessary qualification, etc., and whether that amount is sufficient or adequate. To my mind, even before domestic TP, probably this could have been questioned under 48B. The debate, yes, Ganesh bhai.
Human partners, I think they were regularly questioning.
Okay.
They were calling qualification, contribution, involvement with the business was regularly being questioned.
Right.
Finally, what was the outcome, I am not aware, but it was always questioned whenever there is a woman partner or two woman partners and business is being done.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, I think so. These transactions will continue to be under scrutiny, and even the working partner, so to speak, even his remuneration, at least you will have to justify the payment under the domestic TP. How is a big question. It's almost impossible, in fact I would say, to make that determination. And here I would like to just delve into another issue which has been the number one issue in all the debates in last since this has been introduced, is the remuneration to the directors of the companies. Let us accept reality. Most of the companies in India are promoter-driven companies, and the salary to the promoters is not necessarily based on the qualification, sometimes not necessarily also based on the profitability, but based on the overall tax situation as well. Even for a moment, let's say, let me give a live example. How Reliance Industries pays pays salary to Mukesh Ambani. How do you think Reliance would be able to justify that the salary paid to Mukesh Ambani is at arm's length by following 5 methods of transfer pricing? It is impossible to do so. You cannot have a comparables in this situation because he is unique. Whatever he has done is unique. What domestic TP specifically brings to the light is this issue. I mean, if you leave aside all the transactions, the promoter expenditure and promoter salary is one of the key transactions which gets hit by domestic TP provisions. So this is as far as the Indian companies are concerned. Even MNCs. Now MNCs hire CFOs and India MD and CEO, whatever, who also becomes a director in the company, and there is a salary being paid to him. If you go and ask the director, is the payment to you is at arm's length, he will say no, it's not enough, right? So, so I should be getting more. Maybe it works well in that situation, but how to benchmark the remuneration to the directors has been a point of debate. I think here only quick approach is that the 6th method of transfer pricing, which has been introduced a few years back, maybe can be considered. TNMM approach is there, but it may not be sufficient enough. I think here one fundamental point is there is the tax neutrality of the transaction. Can that principle be invoked? I think if you look at all other transactions, let's say expenditure payment between companies, there may or may not be there may be a possibility of a tax leakage eventually. But when a company is making a remuneration payment to the director, the company is actually deducting full tax by way of a TDS under 192 in most of the situations, or under 194J for the services of the directors, and making that payment. So there is no leakage of tax revenue that is happening, except, you know, for the tax slabs and whatever. That's a very minor this thing. So if the company has deducted the tax, because company is in a position to do so, especially in respect of directors' remuneration, then maybe the argument that there is no tax leakage that is happening, and therefore this transaction is a revenue neutral transaction, and therefore my inability to justify this salary payment should not be held against me should not be held as a non-compliance of domestic DP. That is one approach or one can explore. So I've been given another 5 minutes, I think, to speak. 10 minutes is okay? Okay. So I'll skip few case studies and I'll come to actually ATIA 8 and 10 situations. There are very interesting issues that arise out of this. Let's first look at ATIA 8. This is slide number 35. Again, I've put down the section on the slide and I'll read it. Where any goods or services held for the purposes of the eligible business are transferred to any other business carried on by the SSE, or where any goods or services held for the purposes of any other business carried on by the SSE are transferred to the eligible business, and in either case, consideration, if any, for such transfer as recorded in the accounts of the eligible business does not correspond to the market value of such goods or services as on the date of transfer, then for the purposes of deduction under this section, the profits and gains of such eligible business shall be computed as if the transfer in either case had been made at the market value of such goods or services, provided where, in the opinion of the assessing officer, the computation of profits and gains of the eligible business in the manner herein before specified presents exceptional difficulties, AO may compute such profits as on such reasonable basis as he may deem fit. For the purpose of this section, market value means price that such goods or services would ordinarily fetch in the open market, or, so they have used the word or here, the arm's length price as determined in 92F clause 2, where the transfer of such goods or services is a specified domestic transaction referred to in section 92BA. Those who have not looked at this section before, let me just try and explain what does it say. Let's say I have let's say there are two SEZ units. Let's say there are 2 units in a company. Unit A is a SEZ unit. Unit 2 is a normal unit, tax paying unit. Tax profits of SEZ unit are fully exempt as per section 10AA. Now, let us say if this SEZ unit has availed some services from another unit. So let's take a case of a IT company. So there is a particular skill set available in the tax paying unit, and SEZ avails some services from this tax paying unit for the purposes of its projects. Then there is a cross charge, right? So SEZ unit has paid something to another unit, which is the taxable unit. Please remember, this is a transaction from one unit to another unit. One may call or one may question whether this is a transaction at all or not, because it is from one arm to the other arm of the same assessee. But section ATIA 8 specifically stated that if this transactions between a eligible business, means a tax holiday business, and a non-tax holiday business is not at the market value, then assessing officer can redetermine the profitability. And what it says is that to protect revenue's interest, this will be invoked if the profitability of the SEZ unit is higher than the normal profitability. Please remember, this is a reverse logic, wherein you try and see that your comparables profit and my profit. If my profitability is higher than comparables, in a normal TP situation, I would say that I am at arm's length. But here it is the reverse logic. The logic is that if my profitability is substantially higher than comparables profitability, then I am earning more than normal profits, more than ordinary profits, and those excess profits can be deduction, or on these excess profits can be denied. Even before domestic TP provisions were invoked, transfer pricing officers in the international TP, where there were such cases like this, started applying ATI 8. And Honeywell is a classic example wherein this was actually done, where the international, I'm looking at an international TP situation where the Honeywell's Indian unit earned cost plus say 30%, comparables were at cost plus 18%. So officer said that this 12% is a supernormal profit, and I'm going to deny your 10A, 10B deduction because you earned more than ordinary profits. Actually, just 2 weeks back, in a tribunal, there's a tribunal decision in case of Honeywell wherein they have interpreted that this should not be applied to deny